as Lindsay said here a second ago, that she also teaches here in Tampa, Florida. We have somebody from Pennsylvania as well. Um, I am a chemistry consultant. I believe that there are two trainings going on tonight. There's a biology one going. Dr. Falero from Durant is actually facilitating that one. I'm doing chemistry, but like the template for this training has been kind of used twice, so I think that just needs to be changed to chemistry there for me. And Audra Brown Ward put all this stuff together. So as we've already seen, you can ask any questions you have in the chat box on the right of your screen. Um, this is a time to share your knowledge and questions about AP Insight. So any questions you have, just again type them on the screen, and as I see them, I will answer them to the best of my ability. Just so you know, I don't work full time at College Board, and as you just saw, teach at Durant High School. That's my full-time job, and I have one AP class, and this year I've had as many as four in a year, but just one this year, and I just kind of consult with College Board for the AP chemistry stuff. I was brought onto the team whenever they were developing AP Chemistry Insight, and they just kind of held me around to do some of these trainings, which is very, very kind of them. This PLC assumes that teachers have a completed challenge area roadmap and have a basic working knowledge of the AP Insight platform. So I will refer to things in AP Insight, and I'll give you some reminders of things about it, but overall it does assume that you've at least been in there and kind of have a basic working knowledge of it. And then I'm here to facilitate, but you're encouraged to participate and drive the conversation. Again, ask questions over there in the chat window as you feel is necessary, or as much as you'd like. Teachers will understand how to use, so our goals are teachers will understand how to use the tools and resources available on AP Insight to help them address student misunderstandings in, again, AP Chemistry as informed by the Chief Reader Report. And hopefully after today you'll be able to interpret the Chief Reader Report, determine common student errors and omissions, strategically use AP Insight to plan instructions and to plan instructions and assessments that are aligned to learning goals, and then engage with colleagues online throughout the year to share best practices. So this is what we're going to look at. So first we're going to actually look at a Chief Reader Report, using the Chief Reader Report to inform instruction, then responding to Chief Reader Report using AP Insight, and then of course any Q's and A's as ongoing, and then there's a survey at the end if you don't mind taking. Just real quick, has anybody, two questions. Is everybody familiar with the Chief Reader Report? Actually, you know what? I take that back. It's on this right here. Where am I? So in the chat box, type the letter next to the statement that best describes your familiarity with the Chief Reader Report. So I'll give you a second to read that. If you can just type in which one would apply to you, that'd be great. All right, so you've all at least heard of the Chief Reader Report. A couple of you have seen it, and then James, you're about to see it, so at least everybody's heard of it, and we can take a look at one. So, so James specifically, you said you didn't know where to find it. So if you go to AP Central and then you go to the exam section, this is typically where you can find the free response questions. You can see the in the tab at the top here, the AP courses and exams, and this will take you to the free response questions. Typically, you'll click on this link right here, and that'll open up the actual free response. We are very familiar probably with clicking this link here and then this scoring guidelines link, right? We all use those two. This one is right down here called Chief Readers Report. That's the one we're going to be talking about today. And it used to be called the Student Performance Q&A, as you can see right here. So it's actually the same. It's very similar to the Student Performance Q&A. It just has a new name. It's now called the Chief Reader Report. Just curious, have any of you done an AP reading before? So no, for Lindsay and James, I highly recommend doing it. I'll give you kind of an idea of how it goes. And Stephen has been doing it for many years. I've done it. I actually just did it for my second year. For a long time, it had conflict issues here in Hillsborough County, but now our schedule is kind of cleared up from it. So hopefully I'll get invited back again this year. But I'll kind of give you some insight with how that works since you have Lindsay and James have not done the reading And I'll kind of talk about what it is an excellent, great experience as far as both connecting with other AP teachers and getting insight into how the grading system works. It's really useful, as we'll talk about as we go through this training. So this is the first page of a chief reader report. I think you need to be, correct me if I'm wrong, Stephen, is it 3 years? You have to be in your third year. There we go. Yeah, 3 years, and then you are able to get into it. And sometimes there's a waiting list. It just depends on how many apply, how many get cycled through. Usually they have a max number of years before people have to take a break, and then they bring in new teachers. I think, if I'm not mistaken, there was how many? Was there like 300 chemistry readers last year, Stephen? Yeah, I want to say it was about 300. So my first year, I did it 2 years ago. I think we had too many because we finished about a day early, and then they cut it back by like 50 people. So, but yeah, it is an amazing experience. So kind of the setup with a reading, and you can go on to AP Central, by the way, and there are links to apply if you would like to apply to be a reader. Uh, the setup is you go in your first year, you're just going to be a reader at a certain table, and you'll be assigned to one question of the free response out of one of the 7 questions, right? And then you'll be assigned to a table. So there'll be many tables in your free response question. There are more tables for the long questions, 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm sorry, 1, 2, and 3, and then less tables if you're on question 4, 5, 6, or 7. Um, and then at each table, there's a table leader, and then within that area that's doing that one question, there will be a question leader, and then the question leader reports to a chief reader, and hence the name, the chief reader report up here, who's in charge of basically everything. And after you're doing reading for whatever it is, 7 days for 8 hours a day, 7 or 8 days for 8 hours a day, um, you'll start reading and you'll see the same mistakes being made over and over and over by these students. And you'll be at lunch and you'll be talking to other people who are doing the question, and they'll say, "Hey, what are you seeing on your question?" It's like, "Oh, all my students are doing, all the students I'm grading are making this mistake over and over and over again." And then it's like, "Oh, my kids are too." And then, the table reader see this, the question reader sees this, and then it gets reported to the chief reader. There's a big debriefing, and they basically accumulate all this information and talk about what are the common mistakes students are making on the exam and different questions. And then here you see what the common mistakes are in the chief reader report. So that's kind of the setup. The data on page 1 of the chief reader report will say the number of students who took the AP Chem exam, the number of readers who scored the AP Chem exam. There we go, 347 was last year. I was one of those. The global score distribution, and then the global mean score, which last year was 2.67. So after the first page, you will see the following information is supported: the tasks that the students were asked to complete for the question, the topic of the question itself, the point value and the mean score of that specific question, and then answers to the following questions. What were the students expected to demonstrate? How well did the student responses address the course content, and how did the responses integrate the skills required? What common student misconceptions or gaps in knowledge were seen in the response to the question, which is going to be a big one for what we're talking about tonight, this one right here. And then based on your experience at the AP reading with student responses, what advice would you offer to teachers to help them improve the student performance on the exam? And then what resources would you recommend to teachers to better prepare their students for the content and skill required on this question? So here's an example. This is question 4. Are all of you familiar with the exam from last year? Everybody took a look at it. This is the chromatography question on the FRQ last year. Does everybody remember that question? It's the one that had basically had a picture, and maybe you downloaded it. You can go back and see. I want to say it was a strip of chromatography paper. I want to say it had 3 dots on it labeled A, B, and C, and then it asked whether the dot on the top was the most or least polar, if I'm not mistaken. Um, so it tells you it asks what the students were expected to demonstrate in their response to this question. So down here you see in part A, the dye that traveled the farthest on the chromatogram was the least polar. And I think this was a big deal, as you're about to see, that a lot of students put it was the most polar. And then part B here, you can see students were expected to correctly identify an unknown from among the known dyes. So basically, they have to have a working knowledge of an RF value. Here you see the question for mean was 1.78. What percentage of students got the number of points? So question 4 was worth 4 points. And so the most common, most students, the highest percentage of students got 1 point out of 4. So 30% of all students got 1 point, 27 2 points, 17 3 points, 11% got 4 points. Just so you know, 0 points are awarded for students who wrote answers but got nothing right. And then this dash here, we give those to students who didn't write anything at all. So if there are any marks on the exam at all, and on the bubble sheet, we mark in a dash, meaning the student didn't even answer it. So they use that for statistical purposes. So anytime you see this dash, that just means the student did not answer the question at all or make a mark on the paper. Continuing with the example, what common student misconceptions or gaps in knowledge were seen in the response to this question? And then you see in part A, again, the chromatography question here, students frequently did not know how to interpret the chromatogram to identify the least polar dye. Students commonly assumed that the dye that moved the least on the polar paper was the least polar dye. And I think this is probably a common problem because if we do, I think a lot of AP Chem teachers probably aren't real great at covering chromatography in the class. It was for a long time rarely on the exam at all, and here recently, if you've been keeping an eye on recent exams, it's appeared, I think, in like the last 3 exams. But I think most teachers who do a chromatography experiment probably use water as a solvent, and it's very common that the most polar um, dye is going to go the highest because we're using water as a solvent. So in this case, on this chromatography question, again, if you're not looking at it or you don't remember it, the solvent in the beaker was actually a non-polar solvent. So the one that went up the highest was actually the most non-polar, and the one that moved the least was the most polar. And then you can see here, students often did not know how to describe the dye or solvent interactions in terms of basically the intermolecular forces between the dye and the solvent. And then in part B, where it asks you to identify an unknown, the students did not know the definition or application of the retention factor. Welcome, Michelle. We were just talking about right into the Chief Reader Report, so we're looking at an example of an excerpt from the Chief Reader Report. Then you'll see the common misconceptions in a nice little grid here. It shows common misconceptions or knowledge gaps in the chromatography stuff, and then responses that demonstrate understanding over here on the right side. Based on your experience as AP reading with student responses, what advice would you offer to teachers? So this is something that the chief reader is saying that you want to be aware of. Be sure to have students calculate retention factor values. This is actually one of my problems. I actually teach this, and I do chromatography since we do it in honors chemistry a little bit. I actually do a chromatography lab as like a first day lab, and so I think by the time we get to the exam, a lot of the students have kind of forgot, like calculate, and we do calculate RF values. I think a lot of students have kind of forgot a lot of it, and I probably don't review it as heavily as I should. So I remember last year whenever I was asking my students about it afterwards, they were kind of half and half. So then what resources would you recommend to teachers? So you're probably familiar with the AP Chemistry Guided Inquiry Experience Lab manual. There is actually a chromatography lab in there. So anytime on the Chief Reader Report, all the questions will have some sort of recommendation on what they can do and look at to further their knowledge on the topic. Another example, This is one of the long questions. This is number 3 from last year. This aligns to the challenge areas, relate equilibrium constants to acids and bases, and that's the challenge area here, all written out, and then explain the buffer systems, and that's the challenge area for that. And I'll give you a minute to kind of look through. I don't want to go to the next page yet. I want to give you a second to actually look at the question here. But I'm not going to read it all out to you. Pretty basic acid-base equilibrium stuff. Write the expression. Calculate the equilibrium constant. So ice chart stuff. Some buffer questions. Henderson-Hasselbalch here. There's a question about buffer capacity. A lot of students don't have a great understanding of buffer capacity. And then one where it asks about what the pH of this solution would be here. Yeah, Stephen, these are the challenge areas on AP Insight. So if you log into AP Insight and one of the tabs is challenge areas, one of the challenge areas is in big idea number 6, I believe, is equilibrium, right? And these would be challenge areas that you would find in that big idea. No problem. All right, I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next slide here. So this is basically a breakdown on what students were asked to do in this question. They needed to write the KP expression. They needed to use an ice table. They needed to explain why mixing a strong base and a weak acid could result in a buffer solution. This is actually, students a lot of times are weak with this because we often teach a buffer solution as a weak acid and its conjugate base, or as a weak base and its conjugate acid. But of course, mixing in the right ratios, if you mix a strong base and a weak acid, you can end up with that weak acid and conjugate base combination, right? So a lot of teachers, I don't think, hit on this concept enough. And then have to evaluate the justification of relative buffer capacities. And that's what I was talking about earlier about having to have an idea of buffer capacities. And then evaluate the justifications of relative buffer capacities of two similar buffers at different concentrations. So again, this is pulled straight from the Chief Reader report from last year for this question number 3. One of course, the long 10-point questions. Common misconceptions here. Using the brackets, you can see there, right? Using brackets instead of P sub into, I think students do have an issue with this, or teachers just don't hammer it in hard enough. I think they probably we use brackets probably more than the KP values. We do use more KC than KP because we do an entire chapter on acids and bases, and that's all concentrations. So I think students just are more familiar with the brackets and forget about the pressure version. Students a lot of times used initial pressures instead of equilibrium, setting up an ice table and finding equilibrium values. Not really realizing that the partial pressure of NO at equilibrium was given as 0.122 and that 2x equals 0.122. Omitting the stoichiometric ratio, and then having units associated with the equilibrium expression, which of course we know there should be no units for the equilibrium constant. Then for part C here, some students misunderstood that partial neutralization of HNO2 with OH negative is an equilibrium reaction with a large equilibrium constant that results in the formation of a buffer. Some students wrote the strong acid base, net ionic, the classic H plus and OH negative giving us water. And then, of course, students were unable to identify the two components of an acidic buffer solution, a weak acid and its conjugate base. All right, so those are, again, common misconceptions they saw in question 3 this year. You can see in part C2, students using M1V1 equals M2V2. A lot of times, anytime students see any mixing of acids and bases, they immediately default to the M1V1 equals M2V2 equation. Um, Here, you can see down here, students exhibited a complete lack of conceptual understanding for what buffer capacity means for a buffer solution. And I can tell you, this does happen sometimes. I was on what question was I on? I want to say it was question number 2 last year, and that was the one that had the formal charges. And so I had to grade a formal charge question, which basically students had to assign formal charges, and then they had to explain why one diagram was better than another, and it was because the negative formal charge should go on the more electronegative element. And I can tell you probably maybe 15% of students could identify formal charges. Um, I mean, it was just something that from how few students got it right, I think it was just something that teachers don't teach much. And I think that happens. I think probably teachers don't use the term buffer capacity in class enough for students to kind of understand that. So you can kind of see by reading the chief reader report some of the stuff that maybe you are lacking in your classroom whenever you're teaching. So I actually, it was interesting because I learned from the reading, because I don't cover formal charges. My kids, again, we're kind of half and half on it because I do teach it, and I always teach it, and some of you may teach it the same way. Like it's, you take the atom, you take the valence electrons, and you subtract the assigned electrons to that atom in the Lewis structure, and that gives you the formal charge. But I saw while I was doing a reading, and this is just an example of one of those, like some of the things you learn while you're grading questions. Um, I saw a lot of students who got it right would often write valence electrons. They'll put the formula up there and they'll write valence electrons minus dots and dashes. So instead of having the assigned electrons, they just say, if nitrogen has the 5 valence electrons, then you just subtract the number of dots and plus the number of dashes that are attached to the atom, and that gives them the formal charge. And that's something really easy to remember. And so I actually just not too long ago taught formal charges to my students, and I told them that. I said, valence electrons minus dots and dashes. It's very quick, easy to remember, and then now they'll probably never forget how to do it. So very handy. Um, Down here, part C, students did not know the number of particles of HNO2 and NO2 negative in the particulate diagram was a representation of the concentration of HNO2 and NO2 negative. And this is definitely kind of the way these tests are going now, right? We see, I'm going to go back here real quick. We see in the diagram, there are much more, since the rewrite a few years ago, we see a lot more of these particulate diagrams. And it is very important that students understand this. This is giving us a ratio. There are obviously more HNO2 molecules in here than there are nitrite ions. So, and as we saw in the misconceptions, students didn't understand that they needed to be counting those numbers. All right. So planning for success. Review. Use the chief reader report to understand common student errors. So again, after the exam, you come in the new year in the fall, take a look at the chief reader report. What did the students have to do? What is the evidence of student understanding? How does the global mean compare to the maximum number of points? And then create a plan to address the identified needs. Look at your syllabus to analyze where you taught the topic and what adjustments might need to be made. Refer to the challenge area building block summary sheet to see where you might make changes to your challenge area roadmap. What strategies will you use to teach and assess their progress on those sections? What are the quick fixes that you can put into place this year? And I just kind of give you an example. I gave you an example of kind of what I've done with the formal charges, for instance, with the valence electrons minus dots and dashes. Just an easy, quick fix, and now students are much better with formal charges. And then what issues, concerns will take longer to address? So some stuff might be in the long haul. You might not be able to fix it this year. It might be something you have to take care of over the summer or as you plan your syllabus for next year. Step 2, anticipate student struggles in the appropriate challenge area. So if you go on your challenge area, depending on your how much you've gotten into AP Insight, you may be familiar Um, yeah, yeah, Stephen. After seeing those average grades on those formal number two last year, I definitely hit those formal charges a lot harder as well. Um, Depending on your level of familiarity with the APN site, you may be familiar with these challenge areas actually expressing the struggles students have historically had on the exams, and this was done by a committee a few years back, determining what students really struggle with as they go through the course. I've gone through a lot. I see Michelle typing here. This is a good time. Does anybody have any questions on the Chief Reader Report? We did just look at an example of it. So before I move on to this stuff in AP Insight, if you have any questions. I am sorry to hear that, Michelle. Can everybody else see my screen? I should ask that before I assume Michelle's the only one who can't. Okay. Yeah, so it sounds like an issue with your Connect. That's weird. Did you do are you running the application or are you going through the web browser? Running the app? Is everybody else running the app or did you guys go through a browser? App? All right. Sorry, Michelle. Hopefully you'll kind of be able to follow along as I talk about it. So again, these are, yeah, Steven says, I don't know if you can see I assume you can see the chat, Michelle. Steven says, try rejoining, logging out, maybe logging back in. Hmm. Yeah, if you can see the chat, maybe just try logging out and logging back in and see if it pops up. Um, and I'll try not to say anything too important while you're out. Oh, she already left. Um, so yeah, so you see historically where students have struggled, and you kind of get an idea with these student struggles what students might have an issue with when they take the exam. So in AP Insight, you are provided with these student progress sheets, relate equilibrium concepts to acids and bases, the one you see here, and it gives statements and this is stuff again. Students have common misunderstandings on this stuff, so they get these statements, they agree, disagree, and put their reasoning behind their agreeing or disagreeing. So they kind of have an idea so you have an idea of where they stand on their misunderstandings. And again, these are provided for you in the AP Insight program under whichever challenge area you're dealing with. Use the building blocks to scaffold understanding of content mastery skills. So again, we are talking about the acid basis here, Ronstedt-Lowry theory, having to do with the acid-base equilibrium question we were just looking at. And it says performance tasks help secure the enduring understanding by having students use their knowledge in different ways. If you're not familiar, each building block, the challenge areas are built have the building blocks um, as part of them, and each building block has a performance task, and that performance task is typically some problems, kind of worksheet style. I hate to use the word worksheet because I feel that's kind of a naughty word now, but or maybe a small activity, usually not a full-blown lab, but something they kind of do to see it in action. So they are good if you are a person who gives them worksheets or problems out of the book on a certain topic. It's probably a good idea to take a look at these performance tasks, and there are probably some in here that might suit your needs instead of giving them a problem set of acid-base equilibrium out of we have Brown LeMay here in Hillsborough County. Um, you might want to give them the performance task, which will have similar content, but be more tailored to kind of the AP style of questioning and exactly tailored to what they're going to need to know for the exam. But yeah, I would highly recommend Like if you just use the quizzes right now, and it is easy to go in there and just use quizzes. Matter of fact, I just gave my students last chapter, we did a couple of the building block quizzes on bonding, and they actually, I had them do it in the class. They pull out their phones and they all kind of work with each other and do the building block quizzes right there on the spot. And so you might use the quizzes right now. I would say a good thing to explore would be looking at these performance tasks as you're going through and finding maybe some of these that will work for your class. There's a lot of good ones in there. So take a look. You don't necessarily need to add all of them this year, but maybe just find a couple, see how they work for you. So this says an example of a building block quiz. I will say this is actually a bit of an error. This is a challenge area quiz, and the challenge area quizzes are all FRQs or constructed response or whatever we call them now, right? Um, so all the challenge area quizzes are FRQs, and this is an FRQ. So that's a challenge area question for the equilibrium challenge area. Um, an actual building block quiz, which we're going to see on the next page. We're going to see the spreadsheet as I show here. One second. Yeah. So you see the spreadsheet, the answer sheet for how the students did on a building block quiz. That would not apply to this challenge area quiz because they don't have a spreadsheet for that. You have to manually input how many they got right for this. Welcome back, Michelle. Hopefully you can see it now, maybe. So after they take the building block quiz, which is always, if you haven't used one before, they are 4 multiple choice questions, A, B, C, or D. And it immediately tells them, you can have it set to where it immediately tells them whether they got it right or wrong. And if they got it wrong, it tells them why they got it wrong, assuming they didn't just randomly guess, because of course all the distractors have a reason for being there. So assuming they didn't randomly guess, it tells them why that answer was wrong. Step 5, after they take the building block quiz, it gives you this nice spreadsheet of how they're doing. This class, you can see up here, there's 3 down here in the red, which basically I can tell you out of 4 questions. Hey, Michelle, I'm glad. Michelle can see now. I can tell you to get into the green, the student actually has to have all 4 correct, like Joanna Hall here. And then to get in the yellow, they have to get 3 of them correct. 75% of them correct to get in the yellow, and then anybody who gets 50% below is in the red. So I'm actually pretty happy if the students get 3 out of the 4 correct. If I can get them to get 3 out of every 4 correct on the AP exam, they're going to be sitting all right. So, but yeah, the mastery, all 4 correct. These are the kids who are getting 5s. And in my experience, the ones who can get 4 out of 4 are typically like 5 kids because the questions are pretty tough. Yeah, as Steven said down there, the questions are challenging, and I will say they're very verbose. A lot of them are actually, in my personal feelings, are a lot of them are a bit wordier than what you'll actually see on the AP exam. But they are really good. They're challenging, and to get them right, they have to have a pretty deep conceptual understanding of the material. So they are well constructed. Yeah, Steven said they get to the heart of the challenge area, and it's true. They are well designed, and I can tell you, I was part of. I didn't write the questions, but I was on the question review team whenever they were coming through, and there was like a team of 7 of us going through them, and it was a very rigorous process. I mean, the questions, whenever you have like 7, 8, however many people it was, whenever you have like 7 or 8 people dissecting a proposed question, it just got chopped to pieces. Some questions I thought were perfectly fine. 4 people thought they were complete garbage because of the way they were worded, and they'd have to go back to the drawing board. They were definitely held under a critical eye. And then Michelle says, is it possible to reassign a quiz at a later time in the year if they fail it earlier? I believe that is absolutely possible. You can, I think you can assign it as many times if you want, if I'm not mistaken. So I don't think I've tried that, but I'm fairly certain that is something that can be done. I think you can like clear the data. I don't know if The thing is, I don't know if you can keep the data and assign it a second time. You might have to clear the data to let them do it a second time, but I'm not positive on that one. Stephen might be chiming in on that. Yeah, Stephen says he has the students rework the quizzes as part of a follow up to earn back points. Stephen, do they have to clear data? Do you know, Stephen, or can you actually just assign it a second time? So Michelle, just so you know, at the end there is an email address. Since I don't have a definitive answer on that, there's an email address at the end that you can most certainly email, and they are, I can tell you, AP Insight team is awesome at getting back to you if you have any questions. Or I would get it. You could probably go in there and explore a little bit and probably figure it out. But if not, you can always email them, and they will most certainly get right back to you. Yeah, I remember the first year it came out, I couldn't. I was having an issue getting my class put in because I actually had a my login was one as a facilitator, so a demo class came up and I couldn't get my actual real class to come up because my login was the same for my facilitator login and my class login. So it was, and I emailed him, and within 30 minutes, the entire situation is cleared up. They're very impressive over there, as far as that's concerned, anyways. Yeah, yeah. Again, yeah, super fast, and they're all really friendly about it and take care of issues like that, no problem. All right, so we'll go ahead and move on. So that again, you can see where they're at and what stuff you might need to remediate or what gaps need to be filled, right? Where students like when you have a question that a lot of the students like you might see, and all of these are kind of evenly spread out, but you might have one question where 75% of the students miss, and that's something it's like, oh well, we definitely need to go back and cover, and like use mass spectrometry to identify whatever. The font is too small here. TCAW there. So so yeah, it helps you see what gaps do need to be filled. Then afterwards, this is for the teacher. Building blocks, next step guides. Basically, you can fill in what building block it is or what challenge area it is, and just go through and answer these questions. What did my students show the greatest strengths? Where did my students have the most difficulty? Just this is a reflection piece for the teacher to see what maybe needs to be covered in greater detail or what needs to be remediated. And then, of course, the teachers reflect, but of course, the students should reflect as well. And these are once again in the program. And this is just a building block next steps guide. And so they identify the building block or challenge area up here. And then they go through, if they do a building block quiz, there should be four of these blocks here, 1, 2, 3, 4, right? And then they say, they write the question number in there, and then they say whether they got it correct or incorrect. Yes, if it was correct. No, if it was incorrect. And then they reflect on it. So if it was correct, were they confident in their answer? What do they know about the key? What do they know about the key concepts and science practices? What more can you learn about applying the science practices? And then if it was incorrect, what did you know about the key concepts and science practices? Did you misread the question? Did you need more time or practice with the content? So it's just, again, this is a reflection piece. So how can using the Chief Reader Report inform the use of AP Insight in your classroom? So any thoughts on using the Chief Reader Report as we're getting close to coming to a close here. Are there any thoughts on using the Chief Reader Report? in your classroom along with AP Insight. Yeah, Steven said it's certainly helpful in helping me see the big picture of the struggles that students have, and that's absolutely true. And I'll say, a full disclosure here, whenever they said we were doing a training on this, I am no master in the chief reader reports. I knew of it, but was not fully aware of the full scope of the actual reader report and how in depth it went into each question. So I've actually preparing for this training myself, I've actually learned a lot more about it, and it is something that I will definitely, whether I'm a reader or not. I mean, when you're a reader, they kind of go through a lot of this stuff at the reading. There's a big debriefing at the end where they go through every single question and common misconceptions. But but especially if I don't go to the reading, it's definitely something I will check out to make sure I'm aware of what the students are struggling with. Yeah, and Michelle says she was a reader as well. Yeah, we talked a little bit about that at the very beginning, Michelle. I was on question two myself, um, and we were kind of talking about me and Stephen were readers as well. Um, but yeah, we were talking about how helpful it is to do the reading and kind of see the whole process and what's accepted and not accepted and the whole process of how it works out. Yeah, and then AP Insight is the extra piece. It's great to have an ancillary like AP Insight, which is, designed by College Board. So it's so hard whenever you're trying to find books and ancillaries from publishers, and you're like, which one fits with what we do in AP Chemistry the best? And with AP Insight, it's built around how AP Chemistry is built, so it's kind of tailor made for it. Then Stephen talked about Insight giving them tools to address some of those issues. And yeah, and it's one of those things. If Insight's kind of new for everybody. The main concern we saw at the beginning, time. That is that's a concern for everybody, having enough time to cover everything in class. And so again, it's not intended to be. You can't add all of AP Insight to your class um, without making wholesale changes, right? It's again designed to be used instead of some things in your class, supplementing some things in your class. Right now, you might just want to implement some things. Maybe look at some stuff that you were. I was actually leading up to this training. I was looking at my report from last year and looking at oddly like my students. Um, the majority and all the questions were in the upper half anyways, easily. Most of them were in that 50 to 75th percentile range. The top, I don't even know how it's worded, but yeah, in the 50th to 75th percentile range is where most of my students fell. And then secondly was the top quartile, and then the third quartile, and then a few in the fourth quartile. Um, but it was very handy to I don't even know what my train of thought was now. Sorry, but it's very handy to compare the chief reader report with those reports that we get. Going through, yeah, I was going to say I now remember my train of thought. One of the topics that my students did weekly on was atomic structure, which really surprised me. I thought I taught it very well, but apparently I do not. So that's something that's like, well, if atomic structure is a big weakness, then I, go into AP Insight and see what sort of tools they have that can maybe help me get through that. As Stephen said here, the feedback report is very helpful to my students, and in one sense, it multiplies my time because I don't always have the time to give specific feedback to each student. Yeah. And that's one of the things I really like about those the building block quiz as well is that they get that immediate feedback on each question and what their misunderstandings on each every single question is on that. So there is definitely a lot of good in AP Insight. So in AP Insight, there's a share that what works tab. Um, it's basically a message board for anybody who uses AP Insight, and you can post anything that you'd like to, any questions you have about AP Insight. There's roadmaps posted if you don't have a AP Insight roadmap yet. That kind of shows where it gets put into the curriculum, each challenge area. Then you can look at some of these other samples that are already on here. But it's not just roadmaps. There's all sorts of stuff on there. Some people I've seen. There's a few errors that I've seen posted, and College Board's really good at getting in there and getting those fixed. So, but a lot of good stuff with people working together on that. That's in the Share What Works tab. You can see up here did you forget to ask a question during this? Did you want to hear about other AP Insight teachers' experiences? Do you want to share your experiences? The Share What Works, great place for that. Contact information, as we come to a close here, if you would like to email, again, we were talking about doing multiple quizzes on AP Insight. I think you can. I think you can possibly clear data and have them do it again. But again, if you need to, if you get in there and you can't find out how, you might just want to email apinsight@collegeboard.org. They're great at it. Office hours are Mondays, 4 p.m. to 5 p.m. I wish I had those sort of office hours, right? But I think that's actually live. You can actually go in there and live chat with them, I believe. And then there's going to be another PLC in January, so stay tuned for that. This font on this background kind of cracks me up. There is a survey I'm not going to read that to you. I definitely cannot see it, but where my arrow is scrolling here, hopefully you can see that. I believe it is a clickable link. Please click that and take the survey. Thank you very much, Michelle. It is clickable. It's real short, I believe. Please include your full name, school, and school district in the survey, and it will be CEU credit and attendance reporting. James, you don't see the link? Do you see my green arrow on the screen? There should be, if you see my green arrow, right to the right of the green arrow is like in a blue font on the blue background. There is should be a hyperlink that you can click on and open it up. Thank you, Stephen. Appreciate that. Stephen put the clickable link over there in the chat. He was way more on top of that than I was. And since there is a clickable link, sorry, since there's a clickable link in the chat space now, I will go ahead and move on to the other side just in case. So when you're done, yeah, Michelle, it is recorded. Should be posted to AP Insight fairly soon. I don't know how quick they get that up. I can't imagine it'll be very long at all before it's up. And I will stick around for any questions and answers for the next 5 minutes if you have anything, or actually until your questions and answers, or until your questions are answered, I will stick around. So I'm in no hurry. All right. Thank you, Michelle. Appreciate it. Lindsay, have you gotten all caught up on your material from missing those days for Irma? Oh, did you, Michelle? Where are you at, Michelle? Naples. Okay. We're in, Lindsay and I are in Hillsborough up in Tampa. We did not miss 11, though. We only missed 7. And we only had to make up, of those 7 days, they only had us make up 4 hours. So as you can imagine, 4 hours is really not sufficient for getting all that time in. Yeah. Yeah, it's unfortunate that you have to cut labs, but I'm the same way. It's just you want to do labs, but in the end, as far as the AP exam is concerned, it's unfortunately quite often the first thing to go. Yeah. We're scheduled to be our first semester ends in December before break, and we're supposed to be through intermolecular forces. No, we're supposed to be through gas laws, aren't we? So so I'm getting into gas laws right now. We're getting ready to take a week off for Thanksgiving, but I'm hoping to actually get intermolecular forces done before Christmas as well. So I'm one chapter ahead going into next semester. So I have a little bit more time to review at the end of the year. We use Brown LeMay. Yeah, I'm on classic sequence. Yeah, yeah. When I saw that our date for the exam, I saw that it was so late in May. Comparatively speaking, it's like, oh, we got a whole extra week. So yeah, that does definitely help. And I agree, Michelle. It is like I am going to get through everything. It's just like I wish I could go in a little deeper and kind of get into those higher level problems. But yeah, it's just not enough time for all of it. I do think I have a roadmap file in my computer at school. I will see if I can find that, to hunt that up and email it your way, Lindsay, if that is what you're asking for. It actually kind of once you get into making the roadmap, my roadmap is fairly simple. It just says basically you go through it in the order of the chapters we do, and so in Brad LeMay, I just go in the order of the book on the classic sequence. Um, hey Pam, we were just finishing up. Um, I go through in this classic sequence, so I basically just have chapter. There's nothing in AP Insight in the first few chapters, um, for the most part. I'll have to take a look at that. Actually, I may be lying a little bit, but basically, I just have it broken down by chapter. It's like these are all the building blocks and challenge areas in this chapter. It's just so you know what building blocks and challenge areas are in what chapter. So you have a quick glance. It's like, oh, I'm in chapter 7, and all these are the topics that are covered on AP Insight. And then you just adjust your curriculum, take a look at the materials, see if the materials will be useful for you in the context of your curriculum, and make the adjustments as you see fit. Thanks, James. Really appreciate it. Yeah, that I don't. That I can't really. I haven't used all of them yet, Lindsay. Um, so I don't have all of that stuff down. I don't have like individual performance tasks mapped out. Usually, when I get the chapter, I see the stuff. I look through AP Insight. It's like, oh, I want to use this, this, and this. So, James, you have first year chemistry. Is your entire class first year, or it's just you have some first year kids thrown in there? Interesting. And what do you have them for? 50 minutes a day, 5 days a week? I think that is the Lindsay. Is that the situation you're in? Do you have some first year students on a 50-minute period? I would say, I mean, if you have, unfortunately, it's a little late for this now, but I mean, um, probably a summer assignment that has some of the basic chemistry knowledge that you would expect a first year chemistry student to be able to get on their own. Obviously, it's too late for that. But yeah, Michelle is recommending some online video review. Um, and she said yours are borrow others. Usually lean towards borrowing others. There's a lot of much more entertaining people out there on the internet than I am, and I send them that way if they struggle with the content. And it's just I don't know what your experience is with your kids, James, but like some of my I have sophomores, and some of the sophomores are my best kids, and then some of them are obviously way in over their head and my worst kids. And it's unfortunate that like some of them get stuck in there, and it's too late to get them out. And those sophomores who are on the bottom of it don't have a great chance of passing the exam. But you work with them and try to get them to get as much out of it as you can. As far as getting them caught up to speed, though, without like tutoring every day after school, I would have to agree with like the video review. A lot of them have to be willing to, if they're struggling with it, it's like those are the students that need to be more willing to like read the books. Getting a kid to read a textbook's like pulling teeth anymore. Oh, I see. So they are mostly juniors, but so they don't typically take chemistry as sophomores at your school. Michelle said Con and AP are supposed to kind of getting in sync with review. That's good. Yeah, that's nice to hear. Okay. And so basically, they will only take one chemistry course, and they can either choose uh, they can choose to take just a regular chemistry course or AP chemistry, huh? That is very challenging. Um, I don't envy your position, to be perfectly honest, James. Have you do you have access to AP Insight, James? I'm sorry, not AP Insight, AP Potential. Are you familiar with AP Potential scores? Gotcha. And when you say they were on the list, you mean they had 60 or higher, which I think is what College Board recommends, right? So yeah, whenever we do programming at our school, um, okay, so this is what you might want to do, James. If you talk to if you talk to your AP coordinator, there's you can actually just like Google search AP potential and it'll be like the top hit. Go to that and it'll have your normal login that you log on to College Board with, and then it'll ask you to put in a code for your school, and your coordinator has that. And if you type that in, you can actually do a manual search at your school for the students, and there's actually the list. The default setting is they only give you kids that are 60 and higher. And if you only have a list of names, what that means is the 60% higher is based on their data from the PSAT or SAT. That it gives you what statistically what is the likelihood of them passing the exam with a 3 or higher. So if they have a AP potential of 60, then there's a 60% chance they'll pass with a 3 or higher. If it's a 90% chance. But you can actually go all the way down. You can see the numbers all the way down: 90, 80, 70, 60, 50, 40, 30, 20, 10, and 0. Unfortunately, I have one of my kids has an AP potential of 0 this year. So not a great sunny outlook for her. But but it is something that you can look at, and if you go deeper into it, basically the default is it only shows you kids that are 60 and higher, but you can set it for like 40 and higher. And so, for instance, usually I have pretty decent success with kids that are 40 and higher, but once you start going under 40, then I struggle. And Lindsay, if others of you that use that can chime in, you might have more success with those students lower than that than me. But typically, and I do have students with 30s that pass. Um, I don't know if I've ever had a student with a 0 or 10 pass, but a lot of them can still get information from the class. Um, but I would highly recommend, and yeah, the coordinator can give you a list, but I would highly recommend going in and taking a look at the list of yourself if you can, and you can actually see where all the scores, you might have a classroom full of kids with AP potentials of 10, or you might have a class full of 50s, and if they're 50s, that's not too bad. So, oh, no problem, Stephen. Thanks for attending. Yeah, nobody is obligated to stay anymore. The training has finished. You're welcome to stay and chat or ask questions if you'd like, but we are done with the training, so. Oh, no problem. No problem, James. Good luck with with the first year chemistry students. That is definitely a challenge. And yeah, it's tough whenever students struggle on something like nomenclature, and it's such a basic thing that they need to know for the entire class. No problem, Lindsay. Hope to see you soon. No problem, Pam. If you are interested in the content, it is recorded and it's going to end up being on APN site, I'm sure, fairly soon. So if you would like to see the material that you missed, you're more than welcome to check it out. Oh, no problem, Pam. Thanks for dropping in. I don't believe Nora has been here the entire time, so